Welcome back to the Mea Culpa show. Reed Galen, how are you doing, my buddy? How are you holding up these days?
Well, the good news is I live 2,000 miles away from Washington, D.C. I live in a beautiful place. I spend a lot of time outside. I spend a lot less time on social media and on my phone. And that doesn't make me not worried or concerned or frustrated or angry or mad or sad. But I will say that, as we were talking about just before we went on, not that I feel better, but the lack of surprise I have at what we're seeing keeps my blood pressure somewhere only slightly elevated.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, I want to talk to you about something that has elevated my blood pressure. What do you think drove Schumer, as well as the 9 additional Democrats, to side with Republicans on the spending bill? And do you think that it was a strategic decision, or do you think that it's a sign of weakness within the party?
I don't think they've ever had a strategy, at least as long as I've worked alongside them. So I would say it was a sign of weakness. That look, you've probably known Schumer or known of him for a lot. I know not him. I know him not at all. My guess is, Michael, to be very cynical, is that there were a bunch of people in your neck of the woods that called him and said, "You're not going to tank the market worse than it's already tanking under Trump's insanity. So you're going to do everything you need to do to keep this going," because this is, I think, the fundamental misjudgment. Is Schumer and his ilk still believe that there is a status quo to protect, when in fact, I just said this the other day, like I keep hearing this, oh, we're at an inflection point. Michael, we have passed that point. The crossroads are in the rear view mirror. We are in a whole new world. And I think that if you take Schumer, I just looked this up the other day for something I was writing. He went from Harvard to Harvard Law School to elective office in 1975. He's been in elective office for 50 years. Starting in the state legislature, Congress, and now the U.S. Senate for many years. This is not a man who has been exposed to the realities of the world or the realities of politics. He's been an inside man forever. And if you put it through that prism, it makes every bit of sense that he voted to keep the government open.
I get it. But do you agree with the argument? Because he's out there right now trying to spin some sort of a narrative that had the government been shut down, that the Republicans would never allow it under Musk and Doge, and of course Trump, would never allow it to reopen, that they would end up gutting every single program, and somehow the Democrats would be the ones held accountable, which of course would destroy Democrats' chances in 2026. That's the argument that he's making. You buy any of that bullshit?
I don't, for a couple of reasons. One is that none of us should assume that 2026 is going to be anything like we think it is, just because that's what midterms have always been. Secondly, I think it was last week I saw a survey that showed that generic Democrats, or Democrats held a 3-point generic lead for 2026. Now it's very early, but 3 points is not enough. The headwinds that, as that this Trump administration and the accompanying media and everything else, they put a massive headwind on Democratic efforts, big D Democratic efforts and small D Democratic efforts. And let's be clear, like, were they going to shut down the government? Maybe. Were they going to let it reopen? I don't know. But here's the thing, like, it's not like they're not doing this anyway. I mean, he's going to look, I'll be honest. I don't know what the Department of Education does. I assume there's a lot of things it does that are good, right? He's going to shut it down anyway. Right. He already erased a bunch of these things off the map. They're never coming back, Michael, at least not in the form that we've ever seen them. Right. And most of us,
including Roe versus Wade.
Right. And so I think that's a cop out. And it's this whole, the ethos of the Democratic Party is like, well, if we do something, then something worse might happen. But if you don't, you're complicit. And that's where they are now. And let's be clear. Republicans are going to blame the Democrats for everything anyway.
Right. That's the point I wanted to make. No matter what happens, every time that there's an issue, the stock market is falling right now. It's the leftover from the Biden administration. Mm-hmm. That's all that he's saying. It's the leftover, that this is some reciprocal event as a result of the failed Biden policy over the 4 years. They're going to blame Democrats anyway. Why is it then, under any other administration, the guy who's leading, i.e., in this case, President Trump, he is not accountable for anything that's happening. That if the government gets shut down, how is this on Democrats and not clearly on Republicans, considering they have the House, they have the Senate, and they have the White House? They have the vote within which to do it. Without the Democratic vote, they would have lost. So explain to me, how is this on Democrats?
Well, again, they would have said, because all of the MAGA media, Fox and all the podcasts and everything would have said, they shut down the government. Democrats are, leaving people to starve in the streets, et cetera, et cetera. But what would have happened, I don't think they would have left the government closed. I think that they're, Mike Johnson, they do worry about this stuff, even in their weird, narrow way, because there are things they do care about too that would stop. And so I would say this is that my assessment is that Johnson just barely got this thing done anyway on the House side, is that it would have had to go back to the House and then he would have had to restart. And so, yes, the government would be shut down. Okay. But also you would have the corresponding and parallel fight of Johnson trying to figure out how to get it back on the tracks, when now people would say, well, I don't really want to do that either. And let me just as an aside say, in a world in which there are things that Thomas Massey from Kentucky says that I agree with, just how upside down a world we're living in.
Yeah, agreed with you on that. So let me ask you, do you agree with the argument that the Democrats' willingness to compromise on the spending bill will now only embolden Trump and the GOP in their future negotiations? Because I think that Schumer and the other 9, I just think they rolled over. They rolled over like a puppy who's come to get his belly scratched. They just rolled over. For what reason, again, I don't know. But you think that this emboldens the GOP and Trump?
More than it already has? Sure. I mean, I think they see the Democrats as weak and feckless and leaderless, and they are, unfortunately, as a party, not as individual voters or even some of their individual members, but as a party, as an organization, it is. And what happens between now and September 30th or whenever this latest spending deal runs out, right, is going to be worse. I mean, if you look, last week, the Department of Agriculture cut $1 billion out of the ability to buy local fruits and vegetables for schools and those sorts of things. Just today, as we're recording this, Michael, they cut another $500 million out of funding and produce for food banks. Now, my first thing is, like, we're America. It's 2025. I can't imagine we still have to be a country as wealthy as we are that needs food banks, but here we are. That's now gone, right? So this is going to have a real effect on real people. But Democrats are talking about, CRs and this and that. And, if democracy is at stake, like if democracy is at stake, like what are you talking about? And it's just this unwillingness that goes back not since Chuck Schumer rolled over last week, and not 2024, not 2022, but almost to the moment when Trump came down the escalator. And I was initially guilty of this, of not taking it seriously. And now he wins in 2016. Okay, we'll get it back in 2018. Okay, we won in 2020, but that was just blind luck almost at this point. 2022, Democrats did better than they thought they would, but they didn't win anything. And then 2024, we lose again. And so it's like, at what point are you going to keep running the same playbook with the same old players and not winning and having some expectation that you'll get a different result? And clearly, and again, let me I'm sorry for the extended rant here, Michael, but also, like, it's not just that the Democrats lost. They lost on the back of Trump getting Latinos, black men to come to his side, and millions of Democratic voters saying, I want nothing to do with either of you. And that, to me, is the craziest part. Is the Democrats' problem is not with the Republicans. The Democrats' problem is their own voters want nothing to do with them.
Yep. Which actually brings me into 2 points. The first I want to make is, as we're watching these Republican lawmakers getting booed at these town halls, like what happened with Representative Harriet Hageman of Wyoming. These folks stood up and said, hey, slow down there. We're farming. We need this money coming to us. Otherwise, we will lose our farms. We will lose our income. We will lose our livelihood. We will lose everything. She's like, well, I still, I believe in Elon Musk and Doge. And they're starting to scream, fuck you. Seriously? Right? You're listening to somebody that's never picked a fucking strawberry in his life, never farmed the land, never did any of that sort of shit, telling you what should go and what should stay. I mean, I'm blown away, to be very honest with you. And I believe that Trump is ultimately, as usual, he's using Musk because when this thing blows up, and it will blow up, he'll have Elon Musk to blame. And Elon will just disappear into his zone. Otherwise, Trump will use the full power of the government to come down and squash him like a fucking ant, right? That's what I think is going to ultimately happen. Because look, let me just say, we're in a real serious issue when you have a group of individuals who have so much money, so much that they can't spend it in 1,000 lifetimes. And then you have people who now, like these people in Wyoming, who are going to lose the little that they have. And you have your representative, the person that you put in that office to represent you, telling you that I'm siding with the billionaire over your needs, over my constituents' needs. That is why I believe that Schumer and the 9 Democrats fucked up.
Yeah. I mean, look, I live just south of Wyoming. It is an incomparably beautiful place. And most people on the East Coast that think of Wyoming, they probably think of Jackson Hole, which is an incredible place, but also a literally very narrow strip of land on the far northwestern corner. Most of Wyoming is empty. It is farms and it is oil wells. And it is a hard place to live. It is an unforgiving place to live, Michael. It does not give up what it has easily. And Hageman is a nut. Like, she is a flat out nut, right? She is to call her an ideologue is an insult to ideologues. And so she is now facing what she should. Now, here's what I think our Democrat friends should do is at every level of office in the state of Wyoming, which has 500,000 people, right? They should be ensuring that not one Republican runs unopposed in 2026. Not one Republican gets away with any of this, that anybody who has a farm or any sort of agriculture operation in their district is getting hammered, because these people, the only thing they fear more than Donald Trump or Elon Musk is losing their cushy job, right, as a legislator. And so you have to make the pain personal for them. And that means you have to start organizing, not at the Beltway level, but at the county level, at the town level. Yes. And here, because this is where you and I are blessed to be able to talk about these issues all day, right? We are blessed to be able to do that. 90% of the country doesn't get to do that. They got to go to work, whether or not it's remotely for an IT firm, or whether or not it's at a grocery store, or whether or not it's at work on a farm in Wyoming. And you know what? They're the people who are going to get screwed. They are already getting screwed, and their kids too, right? And so here we are. How much more evidence do you need that these people don't care about you, don't care about your kids, don't care about your family? And here's what I would say is, like, and I know this is going to be hard for a lot of people to hear, when those people have that revelation, the answer is not to say you're an idiot. Right. We told you so. The answer is you're right. I get it. Mm-hmm. Your answer is you're right. You got lied to, and you shouldn't be lied to anymore.
Right. And because I think that every single one of those positions, from city councils to mayor to governor to Congress members to school board, right? Everyone should be taken by a Democrat. And I think it's an easy fight. All you have to do is get up. This is the part that I am so pissed off about with Schumer and Gillibrand and so on. Fight for us like we put you in office for 50 years to fight. I don't need you fighting on a national level. You're not supposed to be fighting about, the Constitution. Fight for your constituents. And your constituents here in New York or Wyoming or California or Florida, right? Your constituents are telling you, you need to make sure that we don't, as the Democratic Party, allow the GOP to run roughshod over us, because the second you do that, you've actually surrendered. As Trump would say, they surrendered without even having to fire a single shot.
Right. Right. I mean, and so much of this too, I mean, we go back to, I mean, I remember going back, gosh, almost 4 years, Michael, at the end of 2021, being, talking to a bunch of Democratic donors and, the midterms are going to be miserable. And this is December of 2021, almost a year before the 2022 midterms. And I'm like, what Sun Tzu said was the best way to defeat your enemy is to convince him he's already lost.
Right.
And the Democrats can't, if you're Chuck Schumer or Gillibrand, if you don't want the job, fine, but get out of the way.
Right.
Right. I mean, if you had told me 2 years ago that I would say, who you should put on the road more are Bernie Sanders and AOC, I'd have thought you were smoking crack. But the reason why they have purchased with so many Americans across the political spectrum is because they have been sincere in their beliefs. Bernie is able to go out and make this case because he's been saying the same damn thing for 60 years. Now, he may be not your cup of tea and all the other stuff, but the truth is if you watch the video of him in Altoona, Pennsylvania, he's not espousing anything. He's saying, I want to hear from you. What are you worried about? What are you worried about? What are you worried about? And these are everyday individual, average Americans saying, I'm worried about this. I'm worried about that. I'm worried about this. And you know what happens is that Schumer is not listening to those people. Gillibrand is not listening to those people. They're listening to the people who occupy a lot of space in the southern tip of Manhattan, right? For whom there is a much different schedule of events and a much different calculus that is going on, which is we have to survive and thrive even in this time. And if that means the little guy gets hurt, okay. And that, to me, I think is the most damning part of Schumer is he doesn't believe in any of this stuff about, a shutdown would hurt people. His biggest donors are the wealthiest people and the
That's
wealthiest companies on the planet. And that, cui bono, who benefits?
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, again, so he's out doing the whole media tour, talking about how you, Reed, and I, all of America, you just don't understand. And I'm going to explain it to you that I needed to protect the country from a political crisis. I needed to protect the country from your interest in fighting the GOP, because if it was a shutdown, it's exactly what Trump wants. Somebody sold him a bill of bullshit and he bought it hook, line, and sinker. And now, because he's a schmuck and he went and he fell for it, he wants you and everybody else to fall for it. That they would shut down the government. Doge would start cutting everything across the board. Let me be clear, and I said it before and I want to say it again for emphasis purpose. If Doge goes in as a result of a government shutdown and shuts basically another 1 million or 2 million federal employees, you're going to have a lot of really pissed off people. And they're not going to be pissed off at Chuck Schumer. They're going to be pissed off at Elon Musk. And being pissed off at Elon Musk means being pissed off at Donald Trump, because everywhere you see Trump, you see Musk. Everywhere you see Musk, you see Trump. That, to me, would have been the right play. And I'm with you. I don't think that they would have allowed a shutdown. But instead, they've now rammed the next 6 months into a free-for-all. And that I find to be incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, and so let's, they start this kabuki over again, let's say on Labor Day, right? The Tuesday after Labor Day. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And here's my supposition, is that Schumer will still be in charge, and I don't know if it'll be the same 9 senators, but some collection of senators will do some performative filibuster, right? Let's say they do it for a day. They do it for 3 days. They do it for a week, right? And then what's going to happen? The rubber's going to meet the road, and they're going to do it again. And then here's what's going to happen. Well, we can't make any changes now because, Michael, we're almost into the 26 election cycle, right? 2026
Right.
is about to start. So we have to stay the course, everybody. We have to stay the course. But let me just go back to one thing, is every time there's a fight, Democratic leaders shy away. They never, I think about this, Michael, in my ill-spent youth, right? I got in more than one bar fight, right? Probably, and I never won. I always lost, but I always thought I was fighting for the right reason. Like, has any of these people, like, let's go back to 7th grade. Have any of these people did they ever get in a fight out behind the playground, right? Like, they've never stood up for anything. They've spent all their time in like these, ivory towers and cloistered things. And let me go back to this. Oh, you don't understand. Like, that's going to be the epitaph of the Democratic Party. That will be on its tombstone. You didn't understand, right? All of the people I met last fall traveling all over the country, they understood. They're not stupid. They didn't maybe go to college like you did. Maybe they didn't go to the Ivy League, but they weren't stupid. They weren't uninformed. They knew exactly what was going on. They were getting screwed. And they're like, Donald Trump, I don't like him. Kamala Harris, You know what? Anybody who said that didn't vote because their lives haven't changed. And as cynically, as Republicans, we used to say to black voters, oh, they're taking you for granted. And, again, we were doing it for cynical political purposes. I think the African-American community is like, holy shit, we've been taken for granted. And they have been, because Democrats show up and they say, we're going to make you this promise, we're never going to keep, and you're going to give us your votes. And I think a lot of people said, no, I'm not doing it this time.
Yep. And the same with the Hispanic vote, the same with the Muslim vote. I mean, angry at Kamala Harris. There's so much buyer's remorse right now where they're turning around and they're saying, oh my God, I can't believe we fell for this. Trump was supposed to bring manufacturing back. Rather, he's now instilling tariffs that are causing our companies to lay off 20,000 union workers. And this, to me, is a real serious problem. And it's a problem that could have ultimately benefited the Democratic Party. Really, for the first time, calling out the GOP's, what's the right word? Fugazi policies, right? Is there a better way to describe it? I don't care what anybody says. The fact that they're trying to explain to you that tariffs are not going to be borne by the consumer, it fundamentally is stupid. You don't have to go to college. You don't have to go to, an Ivy League school. You don't even have to go to elementary school to know. All you have to do is be a consumer to know that it is never the big guy that pays. It's always the consumer. And you know how you know it? Because, I don't know, last week I went in and I bought a 2x4 and it cost me $5. Somehow or another, it's now $11.50. Hi. And you know why? Because softwood coming out of Canada now has a 200% tariff on it. Right. All right. End of story. It just makes no sense at all. But, Reed, you brought up a really interesting point, Department of Education, because that's one of the things that Trump has talked about during the campaign that he intends to dismantle, to destroy. And as Ramsey said in the 10 Commandments to Charlton Heston, so it has been said, so it shall be done. And he tells Linda McMahon, who he brings on as the secretary for the Department of Education, do a great job so that I could fire you. That to me is one of the greatest lines of all time, right? Reed, you create a monster podcast so that I could fire you, right? It's just antithetical to what you really want. What's been the long-term impact of Trump's efforts to dismantle the Department of Education, particularly on lower income and minority communities? Because you just said it. He picked up 8% more of the black vote. He picked up over 20 some odd percent of the Hispanic vote. This dismantling of the DOE will affect everyone, specifically lower income and minority communities.
Well, let me take a couple of decades back. Like, the Department of Education has been a bugaboo for right-wing wackos for years, because they're convinced that public education has been this, festering hive of neo-Marxism and all this other stuff. When the truth is if you've had kids that go to public school like I do, like, the teachers are trying to get through the day. They've got so many requirements on them as far as like the tests that kids have to take and how they have to do that. They would, they're not Marxists. They're regular people trying to teach a kid algebra, right? Social studies or whatever. Are there outliers? Of course, there are outliers everywhere. As far as I heard somebody say that actually it wasn't somebody. It was a major news outlet said, well, Trump won on the economy. No, he didn't. Trump didn't win on the economy. He won on the idea that he was going to change things, that he was going to shake things up, that the status quo was not okay and it needed to end. And Kamala Harris, when asked point blank, what would you do differently, just stared at the camera. Yeah. And so, that's not the answer. You can't beat something with nothing. And they, Democrats, as I said earlier, are afraid to say anything and do anything because, oh God, what if something happens? Well, something always happens. To your point about, lower income people, it's it's Latinos, it's blacks, but it's also, it's also
white. It's every
white student in a poor community. And look, kids who, need special education. If it's ESL, English as a second language, forget about that. Right. And so all of these things, and again, to your point just a few minutes ago, all of these things ultimately trickle down. The only trickle down economics is that the people at the bottom get screwed the worst. And that's what'll happen, is that the people who need the most support, and that could be educationally, that could be, again, low, free or reduced breakfast or lunch. But again, like I said about the food banks, the fact that we're in the United States of America and we still have to have kids who have reduced or free lunch because their parents can't afford it. I mean, that's the shocking indictment. Are you going to hear anything from Democrats? No, because they'd actually have to change something, and they're not going to do that either. And so what I would say is that the Department of Education is just one more on the list. They've hated it forever. They're going to fire half the people. They'll figure out the block grants to send to the people that they care about. And they'll screw everybody else. And then, Linda will turn the lights off on her way out the door. The building will sit empty, and, people will get screwed, and they'll say, okay, what am I supposed to do about it now? And that's, I think, the hard part, Michael, is that so many Americans, tens of millions of Americans, maybe hundreds of millions of Americans, are so disconnected or so dismayed at everything that they're just going to have to figure out how to survive. And I think that's back to what we were talking about at the local level. It's going to take all of us that have the means and the desire to help our neighbors. Like, they're going to need it more than they've needed it probably since our parents' generation or our grandparents' generation.
But there is no survival based upon these federal cuts. All right. Funding for DOE is necessary. We're already hearing about teachers, special ed teachers, and so on. They're losing their jobs. And I just can't stop thinking about whether or not that this is some sort of Project 2025 GOP deliberate attempt to weaken public education. For what reason, I don't know. Or is it just some misguided reform by some misguided idiot who thinks that this is a way to save money so that they can get to that $2 trillion number, which is impossible, but to get to as close to that $2 trillion number that Trump was talking about throughout the entire campaign?
Well, I mean, I've got a friend of mine who works at a big bank, and and he said something before the election about the whole $2 trillion thing. He goes, you could have any argument you want about how much money the government spends, but if you reduce the amount of money the government spends by $2 trillion, that is $2 trillion coming out of the economy, right? The government, yes, okay, it might spend money directly here, but it pays a teacher, it pays a company, it pays, so all those companies go out of business, right? Or have much reduced sales, which means they got to fire people. right? So all of this will have a nasty negative effect on the country, on unemployment, on the stock market, on everything else, right? And what will happen? Interest rates will go up, right? Inflationary stuff because of tariffs will go up. Housing starts will go down. Consumer spending will go down, and then you get into this doom loop. The problem is, Michael, I don't think any of the people around Trump care. Now, let me just say this about education or any of the other stuff. I have always believed, and I think that my belief is being borne out, that Project 2025, or whatever you want to call it, was always at its core an effort to reduce the amount of things in government that help people at the expense of things that will ultimately control people. And I think that's what you're going to see, is that very, very few things the military is not getting cut. It's getting more money, right? We've got goons like Dan Bongino and Kash Patel at the FBI, and what's her name, the cosplayer at DHS, right? And I think that's my biggest fear, not to be so hair on fire, is that as these things start to cascade, as they start to tumble, as these dominoes start to fall, my fear is that the first step of getting rid of the things that help people is now going to be replaced by the things that control people, which is you are going to see, like you did with this 1798 thing with the guys they sent to El Salvador. Now you're going to have an insurrection act. Why? Well, because people are out of control and we promised law and order. And like, I hope that doesn't happen. I want to be so wrong that I come back on your show in 6 months and go, you were an idiot. And I go, you were right.
Right. I'm glad I was wrong.
I'm glad I was wrong. Unfortunately, like I don't think I'm going to be. We're what, less than 3 months into this? And here's the other part.
60 days. We're 60 days in.
Right, 60 days today. You're right. So let me just say this. The other part too is whether or not it's education or any of this other stuff that's getting, and all these judges. I mean, Michael, you've had to deal with. You're a lawyer, but
we're going to get to this. That's for sure.
But like the idea is like, oh, the judge says you have to rehire these people. You do. Right. So let's say Bob Smith got fired. Is Bob's email address turned back on? Is his pass turned back on? Or is his payroll turned back on? My guess is the answer is no. And it's not gonna be. And I think that's the other inherent piece of this that Schumer and the rest don't understand. And I just had a dinner with some very smart people. It's like, again, that we passed that point, guys.
Reed, I want to talk about something that you just brought up, because I want to make it even simpler for my listeners to fully grasp. Taking $2 trillion out of our budget means 1/3, because our budget is approximately 6.2 trillion. So you're going to try to cut 1/3 of a budget. Show me somebody who can cut 1/3 out of their home budget, and I'll tell you, that's an interesting person to meet. But here's where you're 100% right. And I want to make it again simple for my listeners. $2 trillion cut out of the economy. What they don't understand is that $2 trillion, let's say it's paid to school teachers. Those school teachers get a paycheck. Part of that paycheck goes to Social Security, to FICA. It goes to the city, state, federal tax. If in fact you live and work in New York, it goes to your state tax, and it goes to the IRS. You're paying taxes. So it's not like $2 trillion out with none of that money coming in. In fact, all of that money ultimately comes back into the economy, minus, let's say at maximum, the 10% that Americans tend to save. That's if you're lucky enough to be able to do it. Why? Because money then gets paid to the landlord for the rent, right? Well, that landlord, that's income. He pays taxes on that. On top of that, right, then you have food that people have to buy. There's taxes on that. There's taxes on everything. That money comes back in spades, including the fact that it goes to businesses, as you were mentioning. That business invests in creating more product. Those products end up into the marketplace for people who end up buying it, so that there's profit made by those companies who ultimately pay tax. All right. And then the consumer pays a tax when they buy the product. That's why I'm saying the numbers don't work the way that the Republicans are trying to sell it. And I don't know why a very clear and a very concise answer has not already been created, drafted, and put out there by the DNC in order for people to understand just how bad this tariff scenario is, just how bad that this policy is of trying to cut, thinking that we're going to cut our way out of debt.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the other part too is, I mean, if you think about this now, let me talk about let me switch to use a foreign policy example, but I'm going to bring it home. A friend of mine in the national security space said, if you were sitting in the Kremlin or in Beijing, you couldn't have drawn up how to get the United States to withdraw from world leadership better than what's already happening. So let's bring that home, which is maybe, Michael, we should believe what all of my former cohorts have been saying, which is they want to reduce the size of government so that they could drown it in a bathtub, which means, in fact, it's not just a matter of cutting. It's a matter of completely dismantling the system or systems that we have known that so many tens of millions of Americans and my mom and, so many other, anybody over 65 who's on Medicare or whatever, right? Like getting rid of all of that.
This episode of Mea Culpa is brought to you by Graza, my new favorite olive oil. It's fresh, it's never blended, and it comes from a single type of olive, the Picual, straight out of Jaén, Spain, where over half of the world's olive oil is produced. So why Graza? Single origin goodness, that's why. Only one olive from one region. No mysterious blends. That means a traceable, a fresher product without mixing in any low grade or unknown oils. It's super fun. It has squeeze and spray bottles too, so there's no more messy tins or drippy spouts. Just aim, squeeze, and go. I mean, there are 3 types for any task that you have. One, they have something called frizzle. That's their newest, with a higher 490-degree Fahrenheit smoke point, which is perfect for frying, crisping, or grilling. Sizzle at 410 degrees Fahrenheit, which is an everyday cooking oil for roasting, marinating, and sauteing. Then they have something called drizzle, which is a bold, a punchy finishing oil that you sprinkle on your salads, you dip your bread in, or even you top it off on your ice cream. Look, let me be clear. My daughter is the actual chef in the house, and she uses olive oil on everything from pastas to preparing steak. I mean, not only does this cook well, it smells delicious. Plus, as a healthy eater, Graza's extra virgin oils, they are loaded with those heart and brain friendly polyphenols. So it's good for you. Look, so here's what you get. You get 10% off your first order on Graza's site. But I personally suggest grabbing the trio. That's all the 3 squeezy bottles, the sizzle, the frizzle, and the drizzle, so that you're set for every style of cooking. So head right now to graza.co and use code Cohen to get 10% off of Trio, which includes, again, sizzle, frizzle, and drizzle, and get to cooking your next chef-quality meal. Again, head to Graza, Graza.co, and use code Cohen, Cohen, to get 10% off the Trio. And I love saying it, sizzle, frizzle, and drizzle. So get cooking now.
Getting rid of all of it and saying, well, it collapsed, it didn't work anyway, so now we're going to have to restart something. Well, what does that look like? I don't know. It's not going to be, I mean, is everything great now? No. Is it going to be better under these goons? No. Because they don't have any interest in individual being better for individual Americans. They're all thieves and crooks. That's all they care about, right? They're a gang. That's all they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you understand that, I mean, I was at this dinner I was at, Michael, you can appreciate this. They were talking about, well, maybe if you could compromise with Trump. And I'm like, compromise with Trump? He's a zero-sum guy. He wins, you lose. That's it.
Right.
He doesn't want to compromise with you.
And that's how he made his money, right? That's how all billionaires make their money. Somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. It's all about profit, never about people. Always about profit. But, one of the other mistakes I think that, we as Democrats have not, and I mean it, and I'm going to say it again, have not exploited upon is just how dangerous some of the people that Trump has nominated for cabinet positions. I mean, when you start hearing people like RFK Jr., and by the way, I've had him here on the Mea Culpa podcast. Let me say, he's an awfully affable guy. Mm-hmm. He's very nice.
Sure.
But I fundamentally disagree with just about everything that he says. Now, he makes a very controversial comment suggesting, as of course we're dealing right now with the bird flu, that we let the bird flu continue to play itself out. In that way, we can study the surviving and learn how is it that they survive, use their DNA in order to understand. Now, this to me is so ass backwards. I didn't even know how to respond when I was asked this question. It's so fundamentally stupid. It's like you stub your toe, you break your toe. Under RFK's theory, you chop off the toe instead of scotch taping it or taking a Band-Aid and attaching it to the adjacent toe, right? I mean, he wants to let this thing play itself out so that we can study the survivors.
Well, it's quackery. I mean, it's the same reason why, and I think it was reported that the CDC canceled its annual conference on what influenza vaccines they were going to prepare for later this year, right? It's all quackery. Look, do I think that sometimes we have an overabundance of experts? Of course. Do I think people, particularly in medicine, tend to know, or at least try and do the right thing? I think they do. They take a whole oath to it. I mean, if I wanted to take on RFK, like I'd go out to West Texas and I'd be like, today there are now 3 dead kids, right? Or turn it around on them. Herd immunity comes at 95% vaccination from measles, right? Not at 87. And this idea that you're going to have dead kids, okay. And I say this not because I have anything against anyone's faith, but why isn't it being reported that these are largely Mennonite communities, right? Like why are we not hearing about that? That these are Mennonite communities. I mean, we just, I live in a tourist town, right? The county health officer here just said, if you need to get a measles, MMR vaccine, or you need to get a booster, because we have so many people from Texas coming here, come to wherever and you'll get your shot. We'll do it for free. It's the height of irresponsibility. But again, this is all part and parcel of the same thing. Now, I will say this is that, if bird flu is going to run its course and all these hens are going to die, right? Then not only are you not going to have any eggs, but then you're, like what's Tyson chicken going to do? Right? Like what's Purdue chicken going to do? Right? Like, are they going to be okay with that? Are they going to inoculate? They're going to inoculate. They're going to either cull the birds they have to, or they're going to inoculate the birds they can, if that's even a thing. I don't know. I don't know avian medicine, right? But there's a whole bunch of big businesses who are looking down the barrel of getting screwed royally. And my question is, like, when are any of those CEOs going to stand up and go, excuse me, like,
hello,
I'm a $1 billion poultry company, and I'd like to keep being a $1 billion poultry company. Could you please stop this insanity?
And you know what Trump is going to say to them? Maybe you should inject bleach into their lungs. We should look into that, right? No, speaking about crazy nonsense, it's like it's a fire hose of horse shit that's being thrown at the American public day in and day out. Day in and day. You wake up at 4:30 in the morning, as I do. I've been waking up at 4:30 basically my whole life. And I turn on the television, I start reading the news on my iPhone. And every day, even before I wake up, there's already tweets and posts and news information that's coming out for the shitstorm that we're going to have to deal with on any given Monday. Twice on Sunday, and then Tuesday through Thursday. I mean, that's just how it's working. So this morning I'm reading, and we're talking about Zelensky, president of Ukraine, his decision to agree to a partial ceasefire despite the insane demands that Putin placed upon Ukraine, so that they can get at least a temporary ceasefire. And that this is being promoted and pushed by Trump for something that you brought up before, so that he could declare a victory. Has to be a zero-sum game. He must win. He must be able to go back to his base and be able to say to them, you see, I told you that I and only I can resolve this issue. Despite the fact there is no resolution, there will be no resolution because Putin's demands are so extraordinary that it would basically mean that Ukraine would have to capitulate tomorrow, like Schumer did, and then just cave in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Zelensky's not going to do that. And the Ukrainian people have shown that they're not going to do that. And the Finns and the Swedes and the Norwegians and the Poles, right? They've all lived this. They ain't going back. The Baltics, they're not going back, right? Like they've lived this nightmare before, and they're not going to do it again. And I think that that's one thing too, that, you know, now you've got France saying, well, you know, we'll include Germany under our nuclear umbrella, right? The Poles are like, well, I guess maybe it's time for us to develop our own weapons, right? Like, and this is what happens when you go from a largely unipolar world to a multipolar world, which is everybody's going to be like, look, if it's every man for himself, then I'm getting my nuke too, right? And I don't need an ICBM to get mine where it needs to go, right? I need like a catapult, right? I don't, you know, and so, and I think Trump also underestimates, like, I don't know why this isn't talked about more. I'm no military guy. Like, it's not like the Russians have fought well. They fought terribly. Right. And now have the Ukrainians, you know, been helped by all the Western aid and yes, of course they have. But the Russian military is hollow. I mean, they imported North Koreans as cannon fodder. Right. So the idea that like the Poles and the Germans and the Romanians, right, are just going to be like, yeah, come on in, Vlad. Like, that's not going to happen. And you know, if you've got the French, you know, if you've got Macron talking about maybe we need to send French peacekeepers into Ukraine, like, it's a whole different ball game.
And then you have the same with the UK, right? With Starmer, who's now turning around, who's basically standing up in front of all the world leaders, talking about how we will not abandon our friend, our ally, Ukraine, in support of a dictator who created this aggression, who started this war for his own selfish purpose. They're not going to do that. That's the job of the United States president. It has been as long as I've been alive, and then longer. All of a sudden to just give up that spot as the leader of the free world, I can't believe, because I'm not sure anybody else is going to give up that spot now. Whether it's going to be Starmer who takes over or somebody else, they're not going to willingly just walk away.
Well, and I mean, even I can't remember the woman who runs Italy, but even the prime minister of Italy is like, I'm not okay with this. I'm not okay with the Russians getting whatever they want. Right. So even she's like, you know, again, these are all countries to your, you know, who have living memory of living under a totalitarian state, one or another, either German or Soviet. Right. They all remember this. They all have parents that remembered it. Some of them grew up underneath it. And so it's a whole different thing. But then the other part, too, is, you know, you've got China just sitting there waiting. They'll see what happens. Right. They're fine with this. They don't have any love for the Russians. Right. Like, you know, I mean, Putin is a means to an end for them. They don't care about him. He keeps the West tied up. That's fine. That's what they see him as. And so, you know, they'll wait, and they see Trump as weak, and he is. And they'll do what they feel like is in their best interest. And that could be Taiwan. It could be nothing, right? Why have, you know, all the chips in the world get zapped because we want that island? The island will be there. It's not going anywhere. But here's what we know. The United States, all of the things you talked about since before you and I were born, that's all over. The 80 years of post-war that Roosevelt, you know, conceived of, and Truman and Eisenhower built, right, in the immediate post-war era, it's all gone. It's all gone. Yeah. And so now this is what I say, whether or not it's domestically or internationally. Now, Michael, my piece is, okay, what's going to come next? Because even if Trump stopped today and said, I'm going to make Kamala Harris president, just, you know, waving a magic wand, it would take months, if not years, to already repair. Right. And I'm not sure you'd repair it the way it was built. I'm not sure that you even can. I'm not sure you even can. I mean, and what he's doing, you know, his whole thing, you're going to see so much winning. You're going to actually say, stop. It's too much winning. Right. So how does he get even a win?
You know how he gets a win? He goes after marginalized communities, small communities, the transgender community, right? I mean, attacking, for example, transgender athletes. What are there, like 5 of them in the entire country that all of a sudden they're changing? Now, by the way, let me be clear. I do believe that it is an unfair advantage. And I am certain before you go ahead and attack a community, a marginalized community, a community that really has issues to deal with outside of Trump, everything that they're doing is ideological in nature. And all he's doing it for is, it's not in order to make things right. If you want to make things right, come up with a policy, right, that deals with this issue. But they don't want to do that. He wants to show strength. And how is he going to show strength? Because everything with him is transactional. It's all about the money. I'm going to pause $175 million in funding for a program that involves transgender athletes. I believe it's at Penn, right? Yeah. Where they have a trans swimmer who is.
I don't even think he's there. Program. I don't even think they're there anymore.
Maybe not.
That was like 5 years ago.
It's something like that. But he's pausing because everything to him centers around money, right? And that's not, again, the ideology of America. We have always been a country about people. Billionaires are about money. They're about profit, not about people, about profit. And this again, is just another issue that Democrats have not even began to touch. I understand his point. What Trump does, he takes again that grain of, he takes that that sand, that one piece of sand, and then he creates that piece of sand to be the beach. Well, it's not. It's one tiny piece into a much bigger pie.
Well, there's Ken Burns did an incredible series on Vietnam years ago, and there's a gentleman who is a Marine rifleman, and he's from St. Louis, and he talks about how in the year he was in Vietnam, he only killed one Vietnamese soldier. He said, but I don't know how many, and then he rattles off, Michael, like 8 different epithets for Vietnamese people, right? And he said, and you see, that's how easy you do it. You turn a subject into an object. Right? These people are inhuman. They are not deserving of life. They are not deserving of freedom. They are not deserving of liberty. Look, I know just the very little bit about this guy from Colombia, the pro-Palestinian activist, right? But there's a reason why his name isn't Jack Smith, right? These people, these men they just put on this plane to this hellhole in El Salvador, right? There's a reason why they led with, they are violent Venezuelan gang members. It turns out maybe some of them aren't. Why? Because now, to your point about the grain of sand, the judge says, I told you not to do this, and you did it anyway. And they're like, the judge has no basis to do this. And oh, by the way, like this judge wants to keep violent Latino criminals in the country.
Criminals, murderers, rapists.
When we're just trying to keep America safe. Right. And again, if you're willing to lie about anything, you'll lie about everything. And that's what's happening. But we shouldn't underestimate the insidious evil brilliance of it. Like they know exactly what they're doing, and they're doing these things this way so that, ultimately, okay, those people aren't humane. These people aren't human. These people aren't worthy. And then you get down the line, and then what happens? Again, it becomes a very small group of protected people. The rest of us are on the outside looking in if we're not in a camp somewhere. Right. And that's how these things work. And that's the worst case scenario. And again, I want to come back in a few months and say, I was wrong. I was wrong. I was wrong. I just think that we have to, like history teaches us that these are the blazing alarm bells of this kind of stuff. And, I hate to say this, is that what I learned the hard way was like democracy wasn't enough last year, Michael, as a message. And you know why? Because I think too many Americans either don't know what it means. And it's not because they're stupid, but because they've never felt the positive aspects of it. Or B, they do know what it means. And if this is what democracy means, like, I don't need it because my life doesn't get better. And I think, we have a lot of work to do, those of us in the opposition, to say, like, to your point about like the billionaires, like I'm okay with people making money. I don't care. Make all the money.
By the way, you and me both. You and me both.
Right. But here's where the rubber needs to meet the road, which is you don't get to make all the money so that family can live in squalor. Right. Like the American dream they were sold is bullshit now.
Yep.
And that's not okay. And I think that's where, like, you know, rising tides lift all boats and trickle down bullshit, right? Like, that's not what we're supposed to be. And we're on the furthest edge. Like, the pendulum has swung way out here. And everybody's like, oh, the pendulum will swing back. Yeah, unless they just cut all the little, you know, lines and then it just stays over there. Right. And so for me, the last piece is there has to be a countervailing force. Washington, D.C. is not coming to save us, right? This is going to have to be dedicated groups of individuals in their towns, in their cities, in their counties, in their states saying not one step further. And I don't know when that inflection point is going to be. There is another inflection point. We've passed one. We've got another one coming. And I don't know if it will be a singular leader, if it will be a mass movement. But all I know is that when that moment happens, we all best be ready to get out there and go march with our friends and oppose this with every fiber of our being.
Yeah, it's going to be a mass movement. That's my opinion. But that's why, and Trump knows it's going to be a mass movement, why he's created this whole thing about illegal protests. Really? Mm-hmm. Reed Galen, you're going to show up to the mall and you're going to picket and protest? That's an illegal fucking protest. And you're now going to go to jail. Forget the January 6th defendants or patriots or warriors, as Trump calls it. You're sitting there holding a sign. Fuck you. You're pro-Hamas. You're anti-U.S. national security, and you're going to Guantanamo Bay. You're going to Venezuela. You're going to some Panamanian internment camp in the middle of the jungle, right, with all of the other so-called assholes. And by the way, Mahmoud Khalil, the graduate student from Columbia, he's not the only one. They did it now to a professor at Brown University, also not with a name like Jack Smith. They did it to a Georgetown graduate student, also not the name of Jack Smith or John Doe or Mike Brown, right? These are obviously foreign names. And for whatever the reason, they have now, for the base, they've now weaponized ICE to go into schools, to go into churches, houses of worship, right? To go into anywhere that they want, to take these people without any due process and ship them off, all in the name of what you said, protecting you from them. By the way, you know who actually was, who did that as well, obviously, is Adolf Hitler. Right? You dehumanize somebody, which means that you should have there's no feeling towards that person. If they shave their heads like they did, strip them into their underwear, make them basically walk with their head between their legs, handcuffed and shackled, and then thrown on the floor, head to back of the head to back of the head in lines and so on. Who cares? They're animals.
Right. Exactly right. And that's, and again, history has taught us that the antidote to that is not capitulation, right? The antidote to that is cooperation and as many people getting together, because there are more of us than there are of them. There always have been. The problem is that the us, like, we need a place to go. We need people to talk to. We need people to talk about, and we have to have a belief. Look, not to make too light of it, but Michael, did you ever see The Big Lebowski?
Of course.
Yeah. So, Walter Sobchak tells dude, say what you want about the tenets of National Socialism, dude. At least it's an ethos, right? Like Trump has an ethos. It's awful and it's evil and it's incoherent and chaotic, but it is an ethos. The Democrats got to figure out what they believe in, right? Because right now they don't believe in anything, or not anything that anybody could put their finger on.
They think that we're going to win in 2026 based upon Trump being bad, right? That by default it's going to switch, and I totally disagree. I think it's a stupid theory. It's a terrible way. It's a terrible game plan. Reed, thank you, my brother, for joining me again. The hour goes by, unfortunately, way too quickly. Definitely going to have you back, and we're going to see whether or not, sadly enough, our predictions turn out to be correct.
Thanks, Michael.
Appreciate you, pal.